Hey guys, thanks for tuning into A Matter of Life and Maiden, the podcast of the Beast. I'm Joe Labriola.
And I'm Matt Wagner.
Now, in today's episode, we're going to talk about Killers, the album Killers.
Not the band Killers.
No, not the band.
Okay.
The album Killers. Second album from Iron Maiden, 1981. All right, let's kick it off. This is pretty much a review of the album, similar to what we did on the podcast before this one with Iron Maiden. We're going to talk about production, listenability, artwork, components that we find essential in what the album means and what it means to us and what we think the songs mean, so on and so forth. So we're going to start it off with the Ides of March, the instrumental.
Yeah, there's some debate among Maiden fans. Is this really an instrumental? It's more of like an intro. What do you consider? Do you consider this a standalone song, or do you just kind of consider this an intro to the album?
It's hard for me. I mean, I'm kind of on the fence about it. There are some times when I listen to it where I think of it as an intro, and that's when I listen to the album like in a row consecutively. But I can listen to it separately on its own. So I think it has to be a standalone song, because it is able to be listened to, not in concession with the rest of the album. But I think it depends. I think it depends on what mood I'm in, to be honest. I don't know. I tend to side more towards.
I'm more honestly, I'm more on the fence of it being an intro.
Yeah.
It worked great in concert when they would open with the tape recording of this into Murders in the Rue Morgue. Mm-hmm. I thought it worked awesome. A lot better than into Rat Child. But I agree with you that you can listen to it standalone if you wanted to. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's still a great instrumental. Short, but it's great.
Yeah, it is great. I think it's. I listened to it so many times. I love the guitar work in it. I love the guitar parts in it. And this is where Adrian Smith comes in. So he's adding that extra component with Dave Murray. And he's not quite on Dave's level right now because he's just starting. But he's a lot better than Stratton, in my opinion. And I think they have a lot more call and response than Dave and Stratton did. So,
the other thing that I noticed right away is production value has gone up drastically. Yes. That it sounds like Maiden. It sounds like a Maiden album. Mm-hmm. It's got that quality you expect right from the start. The guitars sound great. The delay on Dave's guitars becomes like a signature of his sound. Mm-hmm. The drums sound great. Steve's bass sounds great. It's one of those openers where this is the real Iron Maiden sound that we all become to know.
And this is the first production with Martin Birch too, right?
Yeah. So I mean, Martin Birch, it's the world of Maiden is,
pretty big deal.
Yeah. Yeah, to say the least, is that his albums are, gospel to Maiden fans everywhere.
Yeah, and again, I just want to touch on that. I agree with you. Ides of March, that's the assassination of Julius Caesar. So there you go again. That's some history for you.
Yeah, I mean, history and literature, they're all through the works of Maiden, all through their songs.
And again, we're talking about the 1998 reissue here, the remastered release, which is the definitive edition.
Well, we obviously didn't listen to the original version of Killers when it came out. Mm-hmm. We were not born yet, so the remastered version is the one that we grew up with.
Yeah, and I think the song that was omitted from the original was Twilight Zone, I believe. So that's on this one.
Yeah, we'll get into that later. We're not missing much with that being left off. But
what about Rat Child? Let's move on to Rat Child.
Well, Rat Child, I've probably heard this song like 300 times, so it doesn't hold up real well to listening to it that much. And we've seen it in the concert a few times. I don't know, 4 or 5 times. We probably heard it in concert. It's really didn't age well for me listening to it that much. I will say positively about the song. Dave Murray's guitar worked like always flawless. Steve's bass, bass worked great. There's not much to it really.
Yeah, I think it's great production, but in terms of composition and stuff, it's. Yeah, like Matt said, I mean, it didn't age well over the years for me, just like you said, listening to it on the album. I'm to the point now where if I listen to the album, I'm probably going to skip it. I'm not going to listen to it. I know what the song sounds like. It's not like I'm skipping it because I don't like the song. It's just, honestly, quite frankly, I'm just burnt out of it. It's really something I wish that they would omit from their live shows too, because I've just heard it. And like Matt said, we've heard it live so many times, and we listened to it so many times that it's just not something we want to hear. I mean, it's not like a song like The Trooper that you can listen to it a million times and still want to hear it. This doesn't have that kind of.
It doesn't have a depth
weight
to it. Yeah, it's just I don't know what more to say about it. I don't even want to talk about it. It's just I'm done listening to it. I don't.
Yeah, don't want to talk about this. Let's go straight to Murders in the Rue Morgue.
Murders in the Rue Morgue. Yeah, great song. I really like Murders in the Rue Morgue. I think inspired by the Edgar Allan Poe.
Oh,
yeah. Story, so literature again, another theme of Maiden's music. Paul does a great job on this one, I think.
Mm-hmm. He does.
Paul's really coming into his own here in this album. And it'll be like the last album with Paul. But this was, I think, Steve's attempt to go all in on Paul. He was going to go to his strengths. They were going to play the music like that. Sounds well with. Like I talked about in the last podcast, there's the Maiden Epics, proggy sound. Epic sound that they would come into later on, and there was that biker punky sound that they also had, and that's the album. That's the direction they chose to go with this album.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Paul does a really good job on the song. I initially liked this song the best on the album. I thought it was the best song on the album, but now that I've listened to Killers, I'll be honest, I really don't listen to Killers that much. If I was listening to Maiden, it was pretty much Bruce stuff, and then I listened to the original album a lot because it's the original album. So I frequently glossed over Killers when I was listening to a lot of Iron Maiden songs. Like if I had it on, like playing random songs on my iPod, if a Killer song came on, I'd frequently just gloss over it. There was a time where even when I downloaded discography to my computer, I left out Killers completely and some of the other albums because I just wasn't really a big fan. And then I'm gonna say, within the past year or so, I kind of started listening to Killers again, and it's kind of grown on me a lot. But Murders in the Rue Morgue, with that being said, has kind of not grown on me as much. I'm not as much of a fan as I was before, but it is a good song, and it does show you Paul's ability. So
yeah, they played it as live recently as the Early Days tour. They played Murders. I believe it was the opener of the whole tour, and it's I like the song probably a little better than you. That being said, I agree with you about Killers. That out of the first 7 original albums, Killers the least talked about. It's the least listened to, probably. Like I said, it's probably because of, if you're an Iron Maiden fan, you probably started listening to them with Bruce as the singer. And when you go back and listen to Killers, it's different sounding. It's got a different vibe. Yeah, like I said, it's going all in on Paul. And has its own, it stands alone on its own, and it still stands. It's there's still great songs in the album. Murders in the Rue Morgue is one of them. Ratchet not so much, but I think Murders is.
Yeah, Murders is a good song. I mean, by no means do I dislike the song. It's probably one of the strongest songs on the album, like you said. But
and all these songs are like, compared to Iron Maiden, they're all quicker paced. They're upbeat. They're shorter. Mm-hmm. It's not what you expect from the band Iron Maiden going forward.
And I think that touches on what you said there too, because I think this is what Steve did to cash in on Paul. Because if you remember what we talked about in the last podcast, with Iron Maiden be this battle between what the legacy of the band was supposed to become, what the band was supposed to become, you kind of had Steve playing with his ideas and Paul playing with his ideas, and they made Iron Maiden kind of together. And then you have this album, which is all Paul. It's all quick, punky stuff. And that's. Let's move on to Another Life, because Another Life, I think this really showed. I think the thing between Killers and Iron Maiden that is different, and I think Paul Di'Anno is Paul Di'Anno on this album. This isn't like Steve trying to tell Paul, oh, you have to do this, this, and this. Like Phantom of the Opera, there's no way Paul's going to write that song. There's no way he's going to do that. That's Steve. This is Paul. I mean, even though Steve wrote like 99% of the songs on this album, or 95% of the songs on this album, the short, quick, like Matt said, the short, quick, like 2.5, 3-minute songs, 4-minute songs. That's Paul's style. That's what Paul can do, and that's what this album does. So Another Life is Paul. I love the song. I love Another Life. I think on this album, it's probably one of his best vocal performances on the album. I love it. I think this is a Paul song.
Yeah,
and that's just my take on Another Life. It's short, but it's sweet. I mean, it's short and it's sweet. It's great.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at the total listings on here. The original release had 10 songs at 38 minutes in length for the whole album. Mm-hmm. You know, recently A Matter of Life and Death was released with 10 songs, and the running time was like over 70 minutes.
Mm-hmm. 71 minutes, yeah.
So that shows you Maiden they were playing short and fast songs. And Another Life's just a good example of that. And it just comes out and the drums start doing those tom runs and it's off to the races. It's just full blast rock and roll. A lot different than what you'll get later on with Maiden, but on its own, it holds up really well. I really enjoy Another Life. It's a great song, great lyrics. It's all around a really great song.
Another Life, and then after Another Life, I mean, we got Genghis Khan, an instrumental.
Would you say out of the 4 instrumental songs that Maiden has, depending on if you count
Ides of March?
Yeah. Would Genghis Khan be your least favorite?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to say it is. I like Lost for Words on Power Slave a lot more.
Obviously, Transylvania's in the league.
Yeah, my ranking is Transylvania at number 1, Ides of March at number 2, Lost for Words, Big War at number 3, and then Genghis Khan.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
The reason Lost for Words is longer, but it just doesn't resonate with me as much as Ides of March does.
Yeah, and I don't think it has that other gear that Transylvania has. It just doesn't get going quite like that. It does have that breakdown part in the middle, where it shifts from one idea to the other, but it just doesn't. For some reason, it just doesn't catch me. Yeah. And like another part of this album too is that Steve wrote every song on this album by himself except for 2, and with Killers being one and Twilight Zone being the other. So, like, people will blame Paul for this album.
But it's really Steve.
Yeah, Steve wrote everything on this album. This is Steve's album. Mm. This isn't like later on when a lot of the writing credits get spread around. This is all Steve. It's his idea.
Yeah, and Genghis Khan, instrumental is cool, but it's just not. It's one of those things that just isn't refined. It doesn't have that same kind of. I don't know. It's just not as. It's not as tight or as closely knit as the rest of the album is. I think you have Ides of March already on the album, so that's the opener, and then you add this other instrumental like halfway through the album. It just seems like weird to me. It doesn't seem like it fits.
Well, I think a little bit of it too is that this is kind of like a classic, kind of like sophomore slump here. That the first Iron Maiden album, Steve had all these ideas for the 4 years that he was playing before Iron Maiden was released, and they all went into that one album. He didn't hold anything back. He put everything he had in that album, and now you kind of made some success. You're making it big, and then you got to make another album, and he's got to come up with a bunch of fresh, new ideas, a bunch of new songs, and some of them are going to be duds because of he's doing it all by himself. There's no Bruce Dickinson writing songs. Adrian Smith's not writing songs yet. He's just a new member of the band. Mm-hmm. Paul has some limitations with his writing ability. Dave Murray's not the greatest songwriter in the world. Fantastic guitarist, not the greatest songwriter.
Yeah, you bring up a good point with that too, because I remember Steve talking about when Bruce came in the band, he was actually able to write around Bruce and make him a better bass player. Like, he could actually use his ideas he had on bass and actually write stuff that he wanted to write now. And that goes back to the beginning of what you said, like, Steve wrote this album for Paul. So, I know you can't blame Paul and you can't blame Steve, and we're going to try to blame Steve, but really, you do blame Steve, but the reason why the album isn't as good or as powerful or as memorable as the later stuff with Bruce is because Paul just didn't have that range. So Steve was playing to Paul's talents, and that's kind of why the album is the way it is. So you really get that in Genghis Khan too. Like, Genghis Khan's a prime example of that. Even though Paul's not even in it because it's an instrumental, like, he's not singing, but even the playing in that isn't really up to par because they tried to make it fit with the rest of the album. I just don't think it's that great.
Yeah, I mean, if the short rockers are your thing and you like the fast punk style music, Killer's your album. That's what you're going to get. If that's not so much your thing, then it's going to leave you wanting more. But you kind of have to look at each album on its own and what it is, and Killers is kind of one of those standalone albums that it doesn't sound like anything else, and I think Genghis Khan's an example of that. There's no other song that sounds like that.
Yeah, that's true. What about Innocent Exile?
Innocent Exile, I mean, Killers is one of those albums that you don't have this one song that just stands above the rest. Like the Iron Maiden album, you had Phantom of the Opera. Obviously, heads and shoulders above every other song on that album. Killers is an album of every song is pretty solid. It's all, I mean, if you're going to rate songs, it's all between that range of like 6 and 8. You know, it's very even album. There isn't that one great epic song in it, or there's 2 or 3 really great songs. And Innocent Exile, I think, is an example of that, where it's just kind of solid in the middle song.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Innocent Exile, again, I think the song really showcases Paul's vocals a lot. I think this album in general does that.
The production's another reason for that. Yeah. Martin Birch does a great job of making Paul sound like $1 million.
He does. And Innocent Exile, great track. And I often find myself comparing it to Another Life. And I will say on this album, a lot of the songs sound kind of similar. If you listen to Another Life, Innocent Exile, and then we get later down on the albums with like Purgatory and Twilight Zone, and even Drifter to a certain extent, a lot of that stuff sounds, I don't want to compare Iron Maiden to AC/DC here, but it's kind of like that. I mean, it's like this album where...
Yeah, in that first 10 seconds, you don't remember what song it is.
Yeah, because the rhythms and the sounds and the lyrics are so similar sounding. It's like really, really, there's a sameness to it almost.
Which is a staple of punky music, is that their songs all kind of sound same-ish.
Exactly. But that being said, Innocent Exile falls into that. Now, if we move on to Killers, the next song, there's a little bit of differentiation there.
Yeah, I would honestly say that if you're looking at like the band progressing, Killers is that kind of like shining example of the band progressing forward in their style of music. I don't know if Killers is the best song on the album, but it's something that sounds special. It sounds different. It's that title song of the whole album, and when I think of what Maiden sounds like, Killers is something that would come to mind.
Yeah, Killers is almost something that seems like it should have belonged maybe on the first album, because it has that kind of that proggy sound to it versus, I mean, you could technically swap Killers out and say put it on Iron Maiden and then take, I don't know, a song from Iron Maiden and throw it on Killers. I mean, it's
maybe like Sanctuary or something.
Yeah, like Sanctuary. Like, that's a good example. Yeah, I agree with you. I think Killers is probably the most proggy song on the album in terms of just the way it sounds, and it also has that kind of horror element to it, like the first album did with Transylvania, Phantom of the Opera, stuff like that.
Yeah, Steve's a huge horror movie fan, and this is probably an example of that he loves his horror movies, and I always get that, it's kind of a Jack the Ripper kind of feeling to the song in a way. I don't know if that's the inspiration for the song or what is the inspiration, but to me, that always comes to mind. It's like Jack the Ripper, stalking his prey, lunging up behind somebody with, a knife or a hammer or whatever. And
another great thing on the song that I have to mention on Killers, the actual song itself, is the riff. I love the riff. Like that little thing with Murray and those guys, like the little gallopy kind of like where he's hammering.
Yeah, it's kind of that classic Maiden you get later on.
I mean, you're getting like that's like the precursor to like Trooper, the precursor to Run of the Hill or whatever.
Yeah, not like just reminds me of like this is the album that Dave Murray found his sound. Mm-hmm. This like the original Killers or the original Iron Maiden album didn't have that killer sound to it, and Dave Murray's guitar is, along with I think Steve Harris's bass and later on Bruce Dickinson's vocals, are 3 staples of the sound of Iron Maiden. And Dave Murray, I don't know whether it was Martin Birch or whoever, found his guitar sound for him, and that delay on his solos, the sound of his guitar that we've all come to know is finally present here on Killers.
Yeah, I agree with you.
And it's on this song too. The Killer song is like, that's Dave Murray.
That riffage. Yeah. That riffage. What about Prodigal Son?
This is one of those songs in Maiden that, like, you don't hear another song like this until Dance to Death, probably, with Journeyman. It's also probably the weakest song on the album. Yeah, the weakest song in the first two albums. This isn't Paul's strength doing acoustic. I don't think the song really works. It'd probably been better if they just left the song off the album, but it was nice that they tried, I guess.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that, like you said, I don't think it works either. I think if we're going back to talking about, I hate to go back to the first album and discuss it, but you kind of have to, because we're talking about the evolution of the albums here and the way they kind of influence each other. Again, that piece that you had about a battle between the soul of Maiden. This acoustic sounding music was not the soul of Maiden. I mean, it was.
Yeah, I can't even compare it to. I can't even think of a song to even compare it to. Like, even I compare it to Journeyman, but Journeyman's so far ahead of this.
Exactly. This is just something that seems like it's. I don't want to say it's definitely not a ballad, because Maiden would do that later. But this isn't even comparable to that. I mean, it's a good song standalone by itself. I mean, it's listenable, it's good, but it's not Iron Maiden. It's something that would be like a rock song from like the 70s or something.
I mean, I guess Steve was like experimenting with different ideas and different songs maybe, and he wrote this one, and like I said, he's probably under time pressure. And he's never done this before. Yeah. Like I said, with the Iron Maiden album, he had all these songs already written before, or a lot of them were already done before, they performed them all before. And now he's got to actually produce another album, and he's by himself, and, some of the songs are going to be weak. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Prodigal Son's one of them.
I was going to touch on that. I was going to get back to what you said. I mean, I think that's pretty much. I agree with that 100%. Purgatory. Here we are.
Yeah, I think it's a great song. Yeah. Another quick rocker, fits the mood of the album. Mm-hmm. After, going into Prodigal Son, Purgatory comes out, and also has a great album, or a great art with it too. Yeah, it just fits the band. I think it fits the album perfect.
The half Eddie, half devil face.
Yeah,
that was good. That was great art. Yeah, I as I said earlier, how "Murders in the Rue Morgue" used to be my favorite song. After listening to this album, I was just telling Matt earlier, before we did this podcast a couple weeks ago, I was listening to Killers, and I've been listening to Killers a lot lately. And Purgatory might be, for me now, probably my favorite song. I mean, it's just good. The art's good.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of something we've done a couple times here, is that we've taken all the Iron Maiden songs, we ranked them from worst to best. And we've done it, I think, twice now. Once before Book of Souls, and after Book of Souls was released, we did it again. I like to look at the lists and see. We don't look at the list before we do it ahead of time, and we look afterwards at our previous list, so we're not influenced by it. And I like looking at the songs that jump from low to high, like, what songs did we not think were as good before that now, after listening to for a year or two, how did we change our opinions? And I guess that's kind of like reminds me of Purgatory for you, is that I don't know where we ranked it last time, because we did that like a year or two ago, but I guarantee you Purgatory had probably jumped 30 or 40 songs for you, just listening to you talk about it.
Yeah, I guarantee it, because I like it. I mean, I like it more than Murders in the Rue Morgue, and I think that we ranked Murders in the Rue Morgue number 1 last time on the album.
I think so, yeah. That or Killers. One of those two.
Twilight Zone.
Yeah, this was added afterwards. I think, along with Prodigal Son's probably the weakest song on the album. But it fits the album. It has that Killer sound. It's a quick, fast rocker, just... I'm sure Paul loves this album. I'm sure he thinks it's the best in the world.
Paul Di'Anno and the Killers was the name of his band, so...
Yeah. Like I said, this is Paul to the extreme. This is another example of that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I honestly have really started to listen to Twilight Zone, because I've been listening to this album like the past couple of weeks. I said like a lot, and it's actually really grown on me too. I'm not going to say it has the same effect that Purgatory does, or Another Life does, or even Innocent Exile does, but it's gone up for me a lot more. I'm just, like we said earlier, I'm just burnt out of Rat Child. People might argue and say Rat Child is like one of the best songs on the album, and it very well could be. It's just, like we said, I didn't think it aged well, and I'd rather listen to Twilight Zone. I wouldn't skip that if I listened to this album. I would actually listen to Twilight Zone. And
yeah, when I first started listening to Maiden, Rat Child was that song for me. I was like, yeah, this song's awesome. Like rocks, and then it just didn't age well. It's we go in the Twilight Zone. Yeah, I agree with you. Is that I'm glad they added it to the album. They probably should have left off Prodigal Son instead, but it definitely fits. I guess it adds more to that sound of the album. And then finally we kind of get Drifter here closing the album out.
Yeah, I think Drifter has, like I said earlier, a lot of songs on this album sound a lot alike.
Yeah.
So oftentimes when you're listening to the album and say you don't even say you turn on a radio or something, and I'm not saying Drifter would ever be on the radio, but if you turn something on and Drifter comes on, it's like halfway through the song. If you're listening to the instrumentation and music, you might think for a second in your head it's Twilight Zone, you might think it's Another Life, you might think it's Purgatory, but it's really not. It's just a lot of the songs sound the same. So not that that's a bad thing. I like Drifter. I think it's a good song. I think it's a decent closer. To say this album has been the hardest, probably the hardest. It's going to be, in my opinion, probably one of the hardest albums to review because it really isn't Maiden. This is Paul Di'Anno. This is pretty much Paul Di'Anno's Iron Maiden. This isn't Iron Maiden. This is Paul Di'Anno. This is Steve Harris, Dave Murray, Adrian Smith, and Clive Burr, basically elevating Paul Di'Anno to his.
I mean, even though Steve wrote all the songs, you wrote them for Paul.
Exactly. So this is Paul Di'Anno's album, and like you said earlier, of course he loves this album because they wrote it for him, they made it for him. This is about Paul Di'Anno, and I think that might be a reason why. I don't know if they ever admitted it or not. I know they said Paul had an issue with touring and an issue with drugs and stuff, but maybe it was really the fact that Steve wanted to write more progressive stuff and he just couldn't think Paul could do it, so that's why they let him go. I mean,
I think you would overlook the drug use and all that stuff if he was doing what you wanted him to do.
Exactly. So,
but he wasn't, and they went and got a new singer, which we'll talk about on the next episode to finish off Killers here.
Yeah, production is far superior on this album than it is on
Iron Maiden. It's Martin Birch. Nothing more needs to be said. He's the gold standard in heavy metal with production.
Exactly.
Especially in the 80s.
The guitars sound fantastic. The drumming sounds fantastic. The bass line sounds fantastic. Paul sounds amazing. So in terms of production, it's fantastic. In terms of listenability, this is where it kind of drags for me. Iron Maiden is listenable. I mean, it all the way through. We don't skip any songs on the album. This album, like I had just said, I'm skipping Rat Child. I'm probably skipping Genghis Khan, and I'm probably skipping Prodigal Son. Those are three givens right there. I'd listen to the rest. Yeah, I'd listen to the rest. But I'm skipping 3 songs. I mean, if I'm skipping
3 out of 11 ain't bad though.
It's not bad.
It's not great. It's not. You're listening to the album.
Exactly.
I'd say it's pretty middle of the road with Maiden. There's probably 3 songs on the album that you're going to skip.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And in terms of the artwork, though, and in terms of the art design,
to me, this is on par with anything that's been done by Maiden since the Killers album is classic. It's
classic,
as classic as it gets with Maiden.
You got Eddie with the axe. They refined his character, and this is modern day Maiden because the Eddie from Killers is really the Eddie from Number of the Beast, just transitioned over. Yeah. I mean, it's the same Eddie.
When I picture Eddie in my head, it's the Killers Eddie.
With the axe over the dead body. And then the thing with this album, too, is Purgatory. We talked about the sleeve earlier. Is amazing. Half Eddie face, half devil face. Great sleeve. The Twilight Zone sleeve is amazing. Lady sitting in a chair with a ghost Eddie behind her. Really awesome art.
This is your primer for every other Maiden album to come after it in terms of artwork. Yeah, this doesn't sound like Iron Maiden, but this looks like Iron Maiden.
It does. And even Drifter, he's standing there with a knife and he just stabs somebody. Yeah, on the corner. I mean, it's classic imagery, like you said. It's the visual style.
It's 10 out of 10. It's as good as it gets with Maiden.
That being said, my final rating on the album, it's even though the production's better, I'm a big fan of listenability, and I love the music, and I want to be able to listen to it. So for me, I'm docking points off of this one for that. I'm giving it an 8 out of 10, as opposed to Iron Maiden, which I give an 8.5.
Yeah, I was trying to, even just sitting here now, I'm still, debating the score I'm going to give it in my head. And honestly, I can't give this album any more than, a 7 out of 10, to me, personally. And I know we have a little different opinion about the album. Right now, you like this album. There was a time, 7-8 years ago, that this album really, at the time, meant something to me. I got something out of it. But now, as what I stand right now, 7 out of 10 is what I'm going to give it. Because you said listenability, not great. This isn't Maiden to me. I'm like you said, it's really tough, but Iron Maiden to me does not sound like this. But I'll still give it a 7 out of 10. It's still average.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's. I mean, it stands between there, 7 and an 8. There's no way it's getting higher than an 8.
Yeah, this album to me too is going to be the hardest album to review.
Definitely.
And the album it's hard to talk about because it's unique on its own.
Yeah. So that was Killers. Next time we're going to talk about the Number of the Beast album, which
try not to talk for 3 hours about it.
Yeah, it's as everybody knows, if you guys are Maiden fans out there, it is arguably the best album they have ever done for some people.
It's definitely the most influential album,
absolutely,
that may have ever been done in metal music.
Absolutely, and there's a reason why. I mean, you got Bruce coming, you got all that stuff happening, but we'll talk about it next time. Again, guys, thanks for tuning in and listening to A Matter of Life in Maiden, the podcast of the Beast. I'm Joe Labriola.
I'm Matt Wagner.
Be safe out there, and cheers, guys.